You feel it before you name it, that subtle shift in your chest when he walks into the room, the instinct to measure your words before speaking, and deep down where only God can see, you wonder if marriage was always meant to feel this way. Most Christian women will never admit this out loud, but they know exactly what it means to feel unsafe in the one place that was supposed to protect them. And the reason why has nothing to do with how hard they are trying. The silence around this struggle makes it heavier. Christian women are taught how to submit, how to pray, how to serve, how to manage households and raise children and keep faith alive in difficult seasons. But rarely does anyone name the quiet terror of feeling exposed in your own marriage, the kind of fear that does not announce itself through shouting or cruelty, but through dismissal, defensiveness, or the slow realization that your heart is no longer a priority worth protecting. It is the fear that honesty might be met with correction instead of compassion, that vulnerability will be weaponized later, that tears are seen as manipulation rather than the overflow of a woman carrying far too much with far too little support. You have likely learned to adapt. You edit your emotions, soften your needs, present only the parts of yourself that will not inconvenience or frustrate or challenge. You perform strength when you are breaking, wear peace like a mask when your soul is unraveling, and carry the spiritual weight of the marriage as though your faith alone must hold everything together. You are the one praying through the distance, managing everyone's emotions, keeping the household from collapsing, and still somehow you are the one feeling invisible, misunderstood, or quietly blamed when things do not align. Somewhere along the way, the marriage that was supposed to shelter your heart became another place where you have to work hard to stay safe. This is not what God intended. Scripture speaks of nakedness without shame, of perfect love casting out fear, of dwelling together with understanding. Yet many Christian marriages operate under a different system entirely, one where control disguises itself as headship, correction replaces tenderness, and spiritual language becomes a tool for maintaining authority rather than cultivating intimacy. The overwhelmed Christian woman knows this dynamic well. She has felt the sting of being told her emotions are too much, her concerns are disrespectful, her weariness is lack of faith. She has been corrected when she needed comfort, managed when she needed companionship, spiritually instructed when she needed someone to simply sit with her pain and say, "I see you. I am sorry. I am here." Safety in marriage is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of protection even during conflict. It is the assurance that disagreement will not result in emotional abandonment, that expressing hurt will not be met with defensiveness or dismissal, that showing weakness will not be exploited or minimized. Safety means your husband guards your heart the way Scripture tells him to guard his own, treating your emotions not as obstacles to manage, but as sacred territory to honor. When safety is present, a wife can be fully known without being fully criticized, fully honest without being fully corrected, fully herself without needing to perform strength or hide struggle. But when safety erodes, even by degrees, the effects ripple through everything. Intimacy becomes transactional. Prayer feels heavier. Conversations stay surface level. The woman who once brought her whole heart to her husband now brings only carefully selected pieces. And she mourns the loss, even as she justifies the protection. She tells herself it is wisdom to stay guarded, maturity to stop expecting understanding, faithfulness to keep serving despite the emptiness. But the ache remains, and God sees it. Every moment she swallows her pain to keep the peace. Every night she lies awake feeling alone beside the person who vowed never to leave her alone. There is something most women of God do not realize about this dynamic, something that changes everything once it is finally seen. The exhaustion you feel is not from loving too much, or giving too much, or praying too much. The exhaustion comes from trying to create safety in a system that was never designed for you to build alone. You have been carrying a weight that Scripture never placed on your shoulders, and the moment you understand where that weight actually belongs, the entire foundation of your marriage shifts. Pause here and notice how your body responds when you imagine being fully honest with your husband about what you carry, the emotional load, the loneliness, the fear that you are failing everyone, including God. Does peace rise or does tension tighten? Does hope stir or does dread settle? The answer reveals more than words ever could about whether safety still lives in your marriage, or whether it has been slowly, quietly, systematically dismantled. The tired Christian woman has been told 1,000 times to pray more, trust more, submit more, love more. But no one has named the single shift that actually restores what has been lost. The shift is not found in you changing. The shift is not found in you trying harder. The shift is not found in you becoming quieter, smaller, easier to manage. The shift happens when the one holding power finally understands that his role was never to control your heart, but to protect it. And that every moment he chooses defensiveness over tenderness, correction over compassion, or silence over repair, he is dismantling the very foundation God told him to guard. For the overwhelmed wife, this truth feels almost impossible to accept. Not because it is untrue, but because accepting it means acknowledging that the problem was never your submission, never your faith, never your failure to love well enough. The problem is that safety in marriage requires both people to build it. And when one person refuses or does not know how, the other cannot carry the weight alone, no matter how godly, how patient, how faithful she becomes. You cannot create emotional safety for yourself inside a dynamic where your emotions are treated as inconveniences. You cannot build intimacy when vulnerability is met with punishment. You cannot rest in a relationship where honesty costs you peace. But Scripture does not call wives to create their own safety through perfect submission or flawless endurance. Ephesians commands husbands to love sacrificially, to nourish and cherish, to lay down their lives, not their opinions. 1 Peter instructs husbands to dwell with their wives with understanding, honoring them as co-heirs, warning that failure to do so hinders even their prayers. Colossians tells husbands not to be harsh, recognizing that harshness, whether through words, tone, or emotional withdrawal, destroys the very unity they are called to protect. God does not place the burden of relational safety solely on the woman. He commands the man to build it, guard it, and restore it when it breaks. This matters desperately for the overwhelmed wife who has been told that her struggle is a failure of faith, that her pain is a result of unsubmitted will, that if she just trusted God more or loved better or stopped being so emotional, everything would improve. That teaching is not biblical. It is spiritual abuse disguised as doctrine, and it leaves women carrying guilt for dynamics they did not create and cannot fix alone. The godly wife is not the one who never expresses need, never shows weakness, never challenges or questions. The godly wife is the one who continues to bring her whole heart before God, even when her husband has not yet learned to handle it with the care Christ requires. When safety begins to return, it does not announce itself with grand gestures or sudden transformation. It appears in small, repeated moments where protection replaces pressure. A husband who notices his wife is overwhelmed and responds by lightening her load instead of adding to it. A husband who listens to her pain without immediately defending himself or offering solutions. A husband who validates her feelings even when he does not fully understand them, choosing empathy over correction, presence over performance. A husband who repairs quickly after conflict, who admits fault without deflecting, who understands that his wife should never have to convince him she is hurting for her hurt to matter. These are not extraordinary acts. They are the baseline of what Scripture already commands. Yet for the woman who has lived too long in a marriage where her emotions are dismissed, her needs are minimized, and her worth is measured by how little trouble she causes, these small shifts feel like oxygen returning to a room that has been suffocating her. She begins to breathe differently. She begins to hope again. She begins to believe that perhaps God really does see her, hear her, and care deeply about the safety of her heart even inside her marriage. The overwhelmed Christian woman knows what it feels like to be spiritually strong while emotionally drained, to lead her children in prayer while feeling abandoned in her marriage, to believe God for miracles while quietly grieving the intimacy that was promised but never protected. She knows what it means to be called a woman of God while being treated as though her heart does not require the same care, the same honor, the same sacrificial love that Scripture commands. And she is tired, not because she lacks faith, but because faith was never meant to replace the human need for safety, connection, and partnership. What many Christian women do not realize is that the version of marriage they are enduring was never the design Christ modeled. When Jesus spoke of the church as his bride, he did not describe a relationship built on fear, performance, or emotional distance. He described laying down his life, washing feet, entering into suffering rather than standing apart from it. He gave the ultimate picture of what it means to lead through sacrifice, to hold power without wielding it as a weapon, to see weakness and respond with protection rather than frustration. This is the standard husbands are called to reflect, not a diluted version where authority becomes excuse and leadership becomes control. The difference between a marriage that feels safe and one that does not often comes down to how mistakes are handled. In an unsafe marriage, admitting you were wrong, sharing a fear, or expressing disappointment becomes a risk with consequences. The response is not understanding but defensiveness, not curiosity but accusation, not softness but a subtle or overt message that you are the problem for bringing it up. Over time, this teaches you to stop bringing things up at all, to internalize rather than share, to shoulder burdens alone that were meant to be carried together. In a safe marriage, mistakes and misunderstandings are met with humility and repair. The husband does not need to win every conversation or prove he was right. He prioritizes the relationship over his ego, the atmosphere over being heard first, the long-term trust over the short-term discomfort of admitting fault. He understands that when his wife shuts down, the problem is not her sensitivity, but his failure to create an environment where she can speak freely without emotional cost. He takes responsibility for his tone, his reactions, his patterns, because he knows that safety is not built once and forgotten but maintained daily through choices that either invite openness or reinforce guardedness. Some women reading this will feel anger rising, not at their husbands but at themselves. For all the years they believed the lie that they were too much, too emotional, too difficult. That anger is actually grief. Grief for the time lost performing a version of yourself that required less care. Grief for the voice you silenced to keep the peace. Grief for the woman you were before you learned to shrink. But that grief also signals something crucial. It means you are starting to recognize that what you experienced was not God's standard, and that you were never the problem for needing what God Himself designed you to need. There is also anger at the teachings that told you submission meant silence, that godliness meant never challenging your husband's behavior, that being a good Christian wife meant absorbing harm without naming it. Those teachings did not come from Scripture rightly understood, but from systems that benefited from women staying quiet, compliant, and self-blaming. The Bible never tells women to enable dysfunction in the name of holiness. It never calls wives to protect their husband's comfort at the expense of their own souls. It never suggests that a man's leadership exempts him from being questioned, corrected by Scripture, or held accountable for how his actions affect those under his care. Understanding this does not make you less faithful. It makes you more aligned with the God who sees, who defends the oppressed, who confronts religious leaders for placing heavy burdens on others, while refusing to lift a finger to help. Jesus reserved his harshest words not for sinners, but for those who used spiritual authority to control, manipulate, and burden rather than serve, liberate, and restore. If your marriage has operated under a system where your husband's authority meant your silence, where his leadership meant your submission to patterns that harm rather than heal, that system does not reflect Christ no matter how many Bible verses are quoted to defend it. But what if the shift does not come? What if you are reading this and recognizing every word, but knowing your husband will not read it, will not hear it, will not change? This is the reality for many Christian women, and it must be named with honesty and compassion. You cannot force someone to value your emotional safety. You cannot manipulate, perform, or pray hard enough to make another person treat your heart with the care God requires. You can only control your own responses, your own boundaries, your own willingness to stop shrinking and start naming what is true. God does not call you to stay silent in harm disguised as holiness. He does not require you to endure emotional neglect, spiritual manipulation, or relational patterns that destroy rather than build. Submission in Scripture is never meant to erase your voice, your worth, or your God-given need for safety and partnership. If your marriage feels more like survival than sanctuary, that is not God's design, and naming it is not rebellion. It is obedience to the truth that God cares about every part of you, including the parts your husband may have learned to ignore. This does not mean leaving is the only answer. It means honesty becomes non-negotiable. It means bringing wise, godly counsel into the reality you have been managing alone. It means refusing to carry shame for someone else's failure to love well. It means trusting that God sees every tear, every lonely night, every moment you tried to make yourself smaller to make the marriage easier. And He does not require you to keep doing that to prove your faithfulness. The Proverbs 31 woman is praised for strength and dignity, not for silent endurance of mistreatment. Her worth is never questioned. Her voice is never silenced. And her husband trusts her completely because she has proven trustworthy, not because she has made herself invisible. For the woman still in the tension, still hoping, still praying, still believing God can restore what feels irreparably broken. Do not abandon that hope, but also do not abandon yourself in the process. Keep bringing your whole heart to God even when you cannot bring it to your husband. Keep speaking truth even when it is not yet received. Keep protecting your own soul even as you long for your husband to become the protector God called him to be. You are not failing. You are not too much. You are not the problem. You are a woman made in the image of God, crowned with worth, deserving of care, and seen fully by the one who knit you together and knows every burden you carry before you ever name it. The one who created marriage as a reflection of His love for His people does not look at your struggle and see weakness. He sees endurance. He sees faith that continues even when circumstances do not improve. He sees a woman who keeps choosing love even when love has not been consistently chosen for her. And He is not distant from your pain. He is near to the brokenhearted, close to the crushed in spirit, and His presence does not wait for your marriage to be healed before wrapping around your weary soul. The shift that makes a Christian marriage feel safe again is this. The husband realizes his wife's heart is not his to control, but his to protect, and he begins, through 1,000 small choices, to prove that her emotional safety matters more than his comfort, more than his pride, more than his need to be right. And when that shift happens, everything changes. Not because the wife becomes easier to live with, but because the husband becomes safer to be known by. Not because conflict disappears, but because conflict no longer threatens the foundation. Not because emotions are managed better, but because emotions are finally honored as part of what it means to be human, made by God, worthy of care. If you are the wife waiting for that shift, do not stop praying, but also do not stop protecting the heart God entrusted to you. You were not made to live in fear of the person who vowed to love you. You were made to flourish, to rest, to be fully known and fully loved. And whether that happens in your marriage or whether God meets that need in other ways as you walk forward in faith and truth, His promises remain. He sees your pain. He collects your tears. He will not abandon you. And He is writing a story of redemption, even in places that look beyond repair. Safety was never meant to be something you earn through perfect obedience or endless endurance. Safety was always meant to be the foundation, the starting place, the atmosphere where love could grow without fear and intimacy could deepen without threat. When a Christian marriage loses that foundation, no amount of prayer, submission, or faithfulness from the wife alone can rebuild it. The shift requires both people, especially the one holding power, to stop defending territory and start guarding hearts. And for the woman of God who has been waiting, praying, hoping for that shift, may you know deeply that your worth is not determined by whether your husband ever learns to see it. Because the God who formed you has never stopped seeing, never stopped caring, and never stopped calling you His beloved.